Picture this. You're a Roman legionnaire standing guard on a windswept hill in northern Scotland. Rain lashes your face like frozen daggers. Mist swirls around your feet, thick enough to choke on. And somewhere in that gray void, painted warriors are watching you with eyes that have never known submission. The ground beneath your boots has soaked up 2,000 years of blood. And here's the part that should make you wet yourself with terror. This exact spot represents the greatest military humiliation in Roman history. But wait, it gets worse. Much worse. This wasn't just any failure. This was the moment when the most ruthless, most efficient killing machine the ancient world had ever seen. An empire that had crushed Carthage like an eggshell, devoured Egypt whole, and made kings grovel like beaten dogs, got its bronze-plated ass handed to it by what? A bunch of half-naked warriors running around in blue face paint, screaming like banshees. Today, I'm going to tell you the jaw-dropping story of how Rome, master of 3 continents, builder of roads that crossed deserts and aqueducts that defied gravity, met its match in the misty highlands of Scotland. We're talking about Caledonia, the graveyard where Roman ambition went to die, and the birthplace of legends that would make your Celtic ancestors rise from their graves and weep with pride. But here's the question that's going to haunt your dreams and make you question everything you thought you knew about power. How did a collection of barbarian tribes, armed with nothing but long swords, war paint, and an attitude problem bigger than Jupiter's ego, accomplish what Hannibal with his elephants, Cleopatra with her gold, and every other legendary enemy of Rome could only dream of? How did they not just defeat Rome, but humiliate it so thoroughly that the empire built a 73-mile-long wall just to keep them out, and then spent 3 centuries cowering behind it like scared children? The answer will blow your mind and completely change how you think about power, empire, and what happens when an unstoppable force meets people who would rather die than kneel. The unstoppable death machine. Let me paint you a picture of Rome at its absolute peak, because you need to understand just how impossible this story should be. We're talking about a military force so advanced, so disciplined, so utterly dominant, that calling them soldiers is like calling a Formula One car transportation. Roman legions moved across the ancient world like clockwork death machines programmed for one purpose: total victory. Picture 20,000 professional killers marching 20 miles a day in full armor, each man carrying 60 pounds of gear and still building fortified camps every night, stronger than most permanent cities. These weren't weekend warriors. These were full-time soldiers who ate, slept, and breathed warfare. Their engineering corps could bridge raging rivers in hours using techniques that wouldn't be improved upon for 1,000 years. Their siege weapons reduced ancient stone walls to rubble. Their logistics could supply armies thousands of miles from home for years with Swiss watch precision. And the psychological warfare? The mere sight of Roman eagles on the horizon was enough to make entire enemy armies flee in terror. Kings would suddenly remember urgent business on the other side of their kingdoms. Entire cities would throw open their gates without firing a single arrow, because everyone knew what happened to places that made Rome work for its victories. Take Carthage. Rome didn't just defeat their greatest rival. They systematically deleted it from existence, sold every surviving Carthaginian into slavery, salted the earth where the city had stood, and cursed the ground so thoroughly that nothing would grow there for generations. Jerusalem. After the Jewish revolt, Roman legions crucified so many rebels, they ran out of wood for crosses and had to improvise with whatever trees they could find. The roads leading away from the city were lined with dying men for miles, a forest of agony that served as a reminder to anyone else thinking of defying Roman authority. German forests were carpeted with bleached tribal bones of warriors who thought courage and local knowledge could overcome Roman discipline. Spoiler alert, it couldn't. By 43 AD, when Emperor Claudius looked across the English Channel toward Britain, Rome controlled everything worth controlling in the known world. From Spain's sun-baked stones to Lebanon's cedar forests, Roman law was the only law that mattered. The invasion that should have been routine. When the Roman war machine rolled into Britain in 43 AD, it was like watching a master craftsman demonstrate his trade to amateurs. 4 full legions, roughly 20,000 of the most professional, battle-tested soldiers in the world, plus equal auxiliary troops, hit Kent's beaches like a bronze-plated tsunami of disciplined violence. Southern British tribes tried to resist with war chariots that thundered like ancient tanks, warrior heroes sung in mead halls, druids promising victory through sacred rituals, and fortified hilltop settlements that had never fallen to foreign invaders. None of it mattered. Roman discipline cut through British courage like a gladius through silk. Those impressive war chariots, Roman cavalry surrounded and chopped their crews to pieces. Those legendary warrior heroes, they died just as easily when Roman pila punched through their shields. Those sacred druid groves, they burned beautifully, and the druids made quite the spectacle crucified on their own holy trees. Within months, southern British kingdoms were kneeling in mud, their independence nothing but bitter memory. Roman engineers immediately began turning conquered barbarian territory into proper civilization. Roads slicing across the landscape like stone arteries, connecting newly founded cities. Londinium, Camulodunum, Verulamium. It was the same story that had played out hundreds of times across 3 continents. Local resistance, brief struggle, overwhelming Roman victory, peaceful integration. The machine worked with usual clockwork precision. But then something unprecedented happened. The maps ran out. Welcome to Hell's waiting room. To the north lay something different that made veteran centurions, men who had campaigned from Syria to Spain, look uneasy studying intelligence reports. The Romans called it Caledonia, after one of the major tribal confederations they'd identified. To their methodical minds, it looked like just another collection of barbarian tribes waiting to be civilized. They couldn't have been more catastrophically wrong. The first Roman patrols pushing north realized they had left the civilized world behind and entered something resembling mad gods' fever dreams. This wasn't rolling hills and fertile farmland, where Roman engineering could work miracles. This was a landscape actively hostile to human ambition. Picture the most forbidding environment your mind can conjure, then make it 10 times worse and add weather that would make the damned weep. Mountains that didn't just rise, but clawed at the sky with jagged peaks like sleeping dragons' spines. Forests so dense that high noon looked like twilight, where ancient trees grew so closely that armored men marched single file along paths leading anywhere or nowhere. Bogs that looked solid until they swallowed a man, his horse, and entire supply wagon without leaving a ripple. Streams that became raging torrents without warning, washing away bridges that took days to build. Rocky ground that could shatter horses' legs and turn marching columns into limping processions of casualties. And the weather. Rain that didn't just fall, but attacked, driving horizontally like liquid spears, finding every gap in Roman armor. Fog so thick you couldn't see your sword at arm's length, turning the world into a gray void, where anything could lurk 3 feet away. Roman soldiers, who had marched through Egyptian furnace heat without complaint, found themselves shivering uncontrollably, watching carefully maintained equipment rust despite constant maintenance. Supply lines that worked flawlessly across thousands of miles broke down completely against Scottish weather and terrain. Food rotted faster than consumption. Leather cracked despite treatment. Metal corroded at rates defying Roman metallurgy understanding. Even legendary Roman discipline showed cracks as soldiers questioned whether conquering this wasteland was worth the suffering. But the hostile environment wasn't the worst part. The worst part was what lived there. The painted nightmares. Imagine you're a Roman legionnaire on sentry duty during a misty Scottish morning. You're not some raw recruit. You're a grizzled veteran who's seen every barbarian warrior type. Germanic berserkers fighting naked in snow. Celtic champions challenging entire armies. Gallic war bands painted with blood, howling like wolves. You understand barbarian warfare. They charge with fury and no discipline, crashing into Roman shields like waves against seawalls. Roman formations bend but hold. Roman discipline triumphs over barbarian passion. It's practically physics, predictable as sunrise. Then the fog parts, and you see something that freezes your blood solid. The Romans called them Picti, the painted ones. But that clinical name doesn't capture the absolute primal terror they inspired in men who thought they'd seen everything warfare could offer. These weren't warriors in any sense Roman military thinking could process. Picture human figures decorated by demons with artistic pretensions. Men and women. Yes, women fought alongside men, shattering Roman expectations about civilized warfare, painted head to toe in intricate blue woad patterns that seemed to writhe in Highland light. Not random smears, but complex geometric designs that hurt to look at directly. Spirals drawing eyes deeper into hypnotic patterns. Animal forms looking almost alive in peripheral vision. The paint didn't just cover skin, it transformed them into something not quite human anymore. Hair wild and unkempt, braided with small bones, carrion bird feathers, and strips resembling human skin. Eyes burning with religious madness Roman rational thought couldn't catalog. They moved with fluid, animal grace, silent as hunting cats when invisible, exploding into ear-splitting war cries that could shatter Roman discipline at 50 yards. But here's what really demolished Roman strategic thinking. They weren't an army in any recognizable sense. They were dozens, maybe hundreds of different groups with unpronounceable names: Votadini, Caledoni, Maiatai, Venicones, and scores of others. No central command structure to decapitate. No capital city to capture, forcing surrender. No king to bribe, threaten, or execute. No senate to negotiate with. No treasury to loot. No temples to destroy, breaking their spirits. To Roman doctrine, this looked like fatal weakness. How coordinate strategy without centralized leadership? How maintain discipline without hierarchy? The answer, as Rome learned to its horror, is you don't need those things when fighting defensively on terrain. You know intimately against invaders, understanding nothing about your world or determination never to submit. The battle that meant everything and nothing. By 83 AD, General Agricola forced the issue at Mons Graupius. 30,000 painted warriors faced disciplined Roman legions. The battle was brutal and exactly what Roman theory predicted. Caledonians charged with incredible fury, but courage without discipline is expensive suicide. Roman formations bent but didn't break, developing counterattacks with mechanical precision. Tacitus claims 10,000 Caledonians died versus 360 Roman losses. It should have been game over. Triumphal parades, new provinces, commemorative coins. Instead, it was the beginning of Rome's greatest humiliation. The survivors didn't surrender. They melted back into hills and bogs they knew better than any Roman scout would ever learn, and waited. The real war was just beginning. Rome's campaign of terror. Rome's response was predictable, systematic terror. It had worked in Gaul, Germany, and Judea. Roman legions spread across the highlands, implementing scorched earth. Villages burned, forests fell, sacred groves destroyed in deliberate cultural genocide. Livestock slaughtered, grain stores burned, wells poisoned. But there was nothing to destroy. Caledonians didn't live like civilized people. No great cities, vast granaries, or royal palaces. They lived lightly on land they understood intimately. Settlements could be abandoned and rebuilt with materials costing nothing but labor. Food came from hunting, fishing, and foraging as much as agriculture. When Romans arrived for planned destruction, they found empty huts with cold fires. The people had vanished into bogs, caves, and mountain passes where Roman supplies couldn't reach. The Caledonians had turned their homeland into a fortress without walls. The fortress that became a tomb. Inch-to-Thiel epitomized Rome's misunderstanding of Scottish warfare. This massive fortress, housing 5,000 soldiers, covered 53 acres with stone foundations, timber buildings, defensive works, workshops, hospital, and bathhouse. It was Rome's declaration they were staying permanently. A monument saying, "We are Rome. Deal with it." The Caledonians dealt with it by ignoring it completely. Instead of attacking directly, they flowed around it like water, striking supply convoys and ambushing patrols. They made clear that while Rome owned the ground inside the walls, everything outside belonged to painted warriors. Maintaining Inch-to-Thiel became a logistical nightmare, consuming resources unsustainably. Within years, Rome withdrew, abandoning their most expensive British installation. Roman engineers spent weeks destroying everything valuable, culminating in burying 750,000 iron nails rather than let enemies have them. That hidden nail pile tells you everything about Rome's Scottish experience. The Emperor's final gambit. In 208 AD, Emperor Septimius Severus brought over 50,000 men, the largest army Britain had ever seen. His orders were simple: kill them all, not defeat, kill. Every person refusing Roman authority was to be executed. The campaign was systematic extermination. Valleys swept clean with methodical thoroughness, forests burned to prevent regrowth, roads built through impossible terrain, permanent bridges across ancient barriers. For a moment, overwhelming force seemed like it might finally break Caledonian resistance. But Caledonians had learned century-long survival lessons. They disappeared deeper into wilderness, living off the land with generational highland skills, waiting with patience that no invader could match. Slowly, the land fought back. Rain turned Roman roads into sucking mud, trapping supply convoys. Disease spread through packed legions faster than Roman medicine could contain. Equipment rusted at incredible rates in constant dampness. Even Severus, now elderly, found his health failing. He died in York in 211 AD, and with him died Rome's last serious conquest attempt. The land that outlasted empire. When Roman rule collapsed in early 5th century Britain, something remarkable happened north of Hadrian's Wall. Nothing changed. Picts were still there, still painted with blue woad, still unconquered and utterly unchanged by their 3-century encounter with the greatest empire ever produced. When Rome fell, Caledonia endured. The painted warriors who defied legions lived to see Roman eagles hauled down forever. Tribes that refused to kneel watched as the empire demanding submission collapsed into chaos and irrelevance. The question finally answered. How did barbarian tribes accomplish the impossible? By understanding that freedom isn't granted or taken by external force. It exists in hearts and minds, willing to pay any price to preserve it. Caledonians sacrificed everything: villages, crops, lives, even children's lives, rather than submit. Rome wasn't willing to sacrifice everything to enslave people, offering no wealth and no strategic advantage worth conquest's cost. Every empire faces this calculation. When does victory's cost exceed its value? Scottish painted warriors forced Rome to discover that even the greatest power has limits it cannot cross and prices it will not pay. The empire that made kings across 3 continents kneel was stopped by something simpler than military force: unshakable conviction that some things are worth dying for, and freedom is the most precious of all. The scar that still bleeds. Hadrian's Wall still stands today, 73 miles of stone like an ancient scar that never healed. Tourists see impressive Roman engineering, but those understanding its history know better. It's not a monument to Roman strength, it's a permanent reminder of Roman weakness. Stone confession that places existed where Roman eagles could not fly and peoples would not kneel. Every stone represents Roman admission their empire had limits. Every mile marks the boundary between Roman dreams and reality. Every fort was manned by soldiers, knowing they were stationed at civilization's greatest failure's edge. When you stand on Hadrian's Wall and look north, you're looking toward land that taught Rome the hardest lesson any empire can learn. Power always has boundaries, and sometimes the most important battles are won not by those with strongest armies, but by those with strongest will to remain free. The mist still rises from highland locks. Wind still whistles across ancient stone circles. And somewhere in that wild landscape, painted warriors' ghosts are still laughing at the pretensions of those who thought they could rule the world.